Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. In the last episode, we met Harry, who was Ken's family's lawyer. We also heard how Harry was the voice of reason in Ken's young life after his father died. Episode 8, Scarlet wasn't the only person to say, "God is my witness." The place, Oklahoma City. The time, late spring 1981. As I said, in the early summer evenings, I particularly enjoyed reading my mail while sitting at the little table in my front yard, just as I was that evening I was thinking about Harry. It gave me time to just relax and think about what was happening in my life. I sat there watching the birds dart among the plants and dodging the occasional golf ball lobbed over the fence from the golf course. It was one of those balmy, but not hot, late spring nights when the sunset is so vivid. As I sat there, I contemplated where I was in my life at that moment. Life was good. I was free to create the life I wanted, just like Harry said. And I chose to have a good life with no drama. At 23, I was the display manager of the largest department store in Oklahoma City, working a job I enjoyed. I finally had a reasonable disposable income that I spent on clothes and agreeable living. I had no debts, no real responsibilities. And I was young, thin, and cute, which gave me the opportunities for lots of reckless adventure and fashion misadventure. Also, I had a man who worshiped me living right next door. I had the life I wanted to have, just like Harry said I would. I also understood that while this was a mostly carefree period, it wouldn't last forever, so I had to appreciate it while I had it. When I look back on this time, I know these are my good old days, I thought to myself as I sat at the table that evening, leafing through my mail. Then I heard another smack from another golf ball from over the fence. In the mail was a note, postmarked San Francisco, from Mark, who I hadn't heard from since he mysteriously moved away from Austin. He wrote that he and Victor were now living in San Francisco, and he included a phone number and address. This letter came around the 1st of June, so they had lived in Austin only a little over 3 months after they blew town from Oklahoma City. Little did I know then that this letter would be a turning point in my life. To back up a little, on New Year's Eve 1980, I went to a party that proved that all gay people do not have good taste. To elaborate, I believe gay men have either exquisite taste or wretched taste. There's no middle ground. Though I believe this to be changing with the new generation of gay men as we assimilate into the society at large. But all gay men believe they have exquisite taste, testosterone again, so sometimes it's hard to tell until you see their dwellings. However, this doesn't apply to lesbians. They have a special dispensation which exempts them from the fabulous dwellings requirement bestowed by Saint Sappho or something like that. This exemption also explains the Birkenstock shoes, labia candles, nylon webbing dog collars, polar fleece garments, and potluck dinners. After beginning the New Year's Eve evening at Penny's place, where they tried to spike my Perrier with champagne, like I wouldn't notice, we all ended up at this party at a dive gay bar called The Warehouse on Northwest 39th Street near Penn. The Warehouse was one of those places where you don't wear shoes you care about. You could leave them stuck to the floor, or they might get yacked up on. As the clock hit midnight and all the drunks were singing and kissing each other while I was wiping yak up off my shoes, totally disgusted with the entire situation, I thought to myself, God as my witness, I will be out of OKC by this time next year. I don't know where or how, but I need to be gone by New Year's Eve 1981. Now, imagine me waving my tiny fist, which held the napkin I'd just cleaned my shoes with, at the mirrored ball over the dance floor. I wanted to get out of Oklahoma and just assumed that I would end up in Dallas, where all the upwardly mobile gay boys in Oklahoma City ended up. To that end, I was working very hard at Dillard's, trying to fill out my portfolio and prove myself so I could get a position in one of the Dallas stores one day. It's safe to say that when I opened the envelope that early summer evening, California was not on my radar screen. As I said, Mark wrote that they were back in San Francisco. I wasn't surprised that they had moved. I'd heard that from Barry already. The surprise was that Mark actually, contacted me. I had chalked them off as short-term wonders. On the spur of the moment, I called them and got Mark on the phone. He sounded very glad to hear from me and gave me a recap of the happenings of the last few weeks. It seemed that Mark's display job at the PX was an exercise in homophobia and anti-Semitism, while Victor wasn't happy at Rollins Protective Services anymore. They finally had enough of Austin, and one day just decided to up and move back to San Francisco. So they did. Mark glowingly described the city and waxed eloquent about watching the fog creeping in over Diamond Heights from his living room window. They had rented a lovely Victorian flat in Noe Valley, very close to the Castro. He told me of the beautiful old houses and how he had a good job as the display director with this small specialty clothing chain. Think of coming out sometime, he said. I'll lay the entire city at your feet. Over the next few days, I didn't think much about Mark, as I was busy with work and my usual social whirl. I was also having a flirtation with a guy named Jim, who was a waiter at Pistachio's restaurant. So I'm a pig. Daryl was really understanding about all of this, especially living next door and all. Jim was one of the few blondes I've ever gone for in a big way, with his blue eyes, droopy mustache, and the pretty little cleft in his chin. Penny and Steve were with me the evening I made my move and gave him my phone number. Penny was so funny. She acted like she wanted to crawl under the table, even though I warned her in advance so she could go powder her nose if she wanted to miss the performance. Jim proved to be very resistant to my advances, but we did have dinner a few times and talk a lot on the phone. During one of these talks, he told me of the great love of his life, Brian, who looked remarkably like me. He didn't know if he was drawn to me for me or if it was because I looked like Brian. At one point, I told him I didn't really care. He could pretend if he wanted. I just wanted to nail him. I told Jim of my conversation with Mark, which started Jim reminiscing about the times he had spent in San Francisco. It seems Jim was a dancer, and he was with Fred Waring's Roadshow, whoever the hell that was, and they went there on tour. Sadly, Jim got stranded in OKC during an illness while on tour, and they replaced him before he'd recovered. With no job, he was stuck in Oklahoma City and waited tables. It's a great city, Jim said about San Francisco. I would go back there in a heartbeat if I knew I could support myself. He dug out a book he had on the city, and we looked at photos. Being in such close physical proximity, I, of course, made another pass, which got yet another rejection. A few days later, I invited him over to my place for Godiva chocolates and Perrier and another try at seduction. We had a civilized time for a while until again he rebuffed my advances. I just don't know if I want you for you or because you remind me of Brian, he exclaimed yet again. I had had enough. I strode over to the front door. It took all of 2 steps to get there. My place was that small. I opened it, looked at him, and shouted, "Get out!" He was dumbfounded. "Get out!" "You're throwing me out?" "Yes!" At that, I grabbed his arm and dragged him to the door. "What? When you decide, you know where I can be reached. Until then, get out." And then I pushed him out, slammed the door behind him, and turned out the light. The next evening, I was still smarting from my last exchange with Jim. So, to distract myself, before Penny came by to take me to dinner at Christopher's, I dialed up Mark's number. "Hello," he said. "I want to come visit." I surprised myself with that one. I hadn't intended to say that. "Great. When do you want to come visit? Victor has his birthday in July. Why don't you come out then? Of course you can stay with us. We have an extra bedroom." "Okay," I said. "Let me see what time I can get off work." And after a little more chat, we rang off because Penny was banging on my door. I was slightly dazed with what I had just done. Thank heaven for travel agents. I would never have gone through with this trip had it not been for a very understanding travel agent who held my hand and made all the arrangements. She explained all about getting on the plane and how it all worked. I had never dealt with all that myself. With my visit to California fast approaching, I started to prepare. First of all, Daryl brought over the San Francisco Chronicle to read to just get a sense of what was happening. "I thought you'd like to see what's happening there before you go," he drawled. "The best way is to read the newspaper, so I got you one." Daryl was considerate like that. We both looked through the paper before we went to dinner and read with astonishment an installment of Tales of the City. What so amazed us was the topic. Michael picks up a policeman at the Twin Peaks bar and talks about how guys with no taste in decorating an apartment are usually the best lays. Well, our jaws were on the ground, we were so astonished. Talking about such things in a major newspaper, such a place this was. I also started poring through all my back issues of GQ to see what it had to say about what was being worn on the West Coast. Then there was the issue of hair. What style was I going to go with? Jenny, my stylist, said all the boys in San Francisco were wearing a really short brush cut, which she would blow out so it stood on end and finish with a little butch wax. Now, I hadn't worn my hair this short, nor butch wax for that matter, since the 5th grade. Mom used to take me to the barber to have my head shaved the last day of school so she wouldn't have to do much hair washing during the summer. I hated it, and I swore at the time that I would never choose to wear it again. Indeed. The color I chose was Clairol's dark warm brown. I decided any blonde highlights would look a little too cliché, as I wasn't from California, just visiting. The dark warm brown, combined with my green eyes, would be just the right look. But the finishing touch. Since this was California I was visiting, I had to have a good suntan. I wasn't clued into the Northern California, Southern California thing yet. So I decided to do all of my tanning in one weekend. I was thankful that Brad the doll had moved. It was safe to sunbathe. Brad the doll was so good looking that I would never have shown that much flesh in our combined front yard had he still been living there. He might have come home from work and seen me. And besides, Daryl had already seen the merchandise. Mrs. Freeman was quite amused when she happened upon me while I was sunbathing. She was doing her yard work, and she spritzed me down with the garden hose for some laughs. Thankfully, I got Mom's complexion. I never burned. I used to brag that I could stay in the sun for weeks and not even turn pink. It just turned tan. Unbeknownst to me, though, the hole in the ozone layer was especially large that day. The first day of my tanning marathon turned me as red as a fire truck. This was a new experience. Even the breeze across my skin hurt. That Saturday evening before I went to bed, I slathered every lotion and cold cream I could lay my hands on over every square inch of skin. When it hit my skin, it melted like butter hitting a hot skillet. With all of the oil and the red skin and the waves of heat coming off of me, I looked like hot asphalt in the desert at sunset. So there I was that night, beached stark naked and oily on my bed, with the lights out, even light hitting my skin hurt. Practically glowing in the dark, I was so red. And then there was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" I shouted. "It's me, Jim." He paused. "I had to see you." "Oh, Oh, great. Isn't this fine timing, I thought. Why? I shouted again, expecting yet one more disappointment. I want you. Tonight. Right now. Well, what's a boy to do? I was already oiled up, so I got up and opened the door. But I didn't turn on the light, that's for sure. He grabbed me and held me close. Ouch! And said, "Oh, you feel so hot. I was wondering what it would feel like when I finally got to hold you. Ouch! Ouch!" It's you, Jim. See how hot you make me? Well, what else was I going to say? His timing was perhaps a bit off, but this was a bird in the hand, so to speak. Besides, I wasn't sunning in the nude, for heaven's sakes. Then he kissed me. Ouch! Oh, wow, what a silky mustache. You can imagine the rest. The day came to fly to San Francisco. I talked to Mark and told him which flight I would be arriving on. He said that, among my other things, I should pack a jacket. A jacket, I thought? This is the middle of summer. He's just pulling my leg. If I show up with the jacket in the middle of summer, he's just going to have a good laugh. Besides, it was 107 in the shade in Oklahoma City at 5 in the afternoon. Just the thought of carrying a jacket to the airport gave me heat rash. So, on the plane I went, and off to my big adventure. Beforehand, Mark had said that I should bring my portfolio, as he was looking for an assistant and would try to get me hired. I brought some good clothes, so I would look good for an interview. This was set for a couple days into the visit. I was visiting for a week. When I got to San Francisco, Mark and Vic picked me up at the airport. When we went to get in the car, Mark asked, "Do you have your jacket? It's 38 degrees out." "You're kidding. I just know you are. Of course I don't have a jacket. It was 107 in the shade when I left." It was indeed something like 38 degrees and foggy. Perhaps I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. That's what it felt like. Somehow I, like others who don't live in California, thought that San Francisco was about 30 miles north of LA and that the whole area was warm and balmy all the time, hence the perception of sunny California. Right off, I made the typical tourist mistake, bringing summer clothes to San Francisco. Now, most tourists are alarmed by the cold, but I was delighted. Just think, a place where I can wear a sweater in the summer. I found paradise, I thought. Happily, I didn't bring shorts. For some reason, when I travel, I'm reluctant to bare my legs, even though they're attractive enough, knock knees aside. So with a borrowed jacket from Mark, I was ready to take the city on by storm. When we arrived from the airport to Mark's flat, I noticed that the two dogs were gone. Now, Vic's badly behaved dog, BJ, yes, short for blowjob, was one dog I could live without, but Mark's dog, Danielle, the ladylike Yorkie, was also gone. I asked Mark about it over coffee the next morning, and he got a bit teary. They didn't allow dogs in this place, so we had to give them away was all he could manage. I charged ahead and asked why they couldn't have just waited until they found a place that would allow dogs. We had a truck full of our stuff, and we needed to get it back or they would charge late fees. Vic and I decided at the last minute to move, so we just packed the truck, drove here, and took the first place we could get. They didn't allow dogs. Vic came into the kitchen, and the look that passed across Mark's face told me not to discuss it further. My first look at the Golden Gate Bridge was later that morning with Vic. I wasn't really awed by it, clueless guy that I was. It was the fog. I didn't get a long view of it. I guessed that it was the Golden Gate Bridge by the color, but Victor, who was driving to Marin to check out a burglar alarm for a customer, wasn't quite the tour guide one would want. He seemed resentful at having me fobbed off on him by Mark, who had to work. His lack of enthusiasm rubbed off on me. Later, Victor took me down to the Castro to a restaurant called Welcome Home, where we had brunch, and Vic greeted people he knew and cruised those he didn't but wanted to. I was in culture shock, as I'd never seen the likes of a place like this. Now remember, I hit town in July 1981, when the place was still in full swing. AIDS was just being whispered about as the gay cancer, and later that year was called GRID, or gay-related immune deficiency. But for most of us, it wasn't on the radar screen yet. So I got into the swing of things. The first time I went on to my own to the Castro was a real eye-opener. As I was walking down the hill on Castro, because Mark lived at the corner of 22nd and Noe, I looked over to see, standing in a window at eye level, a guy stark naked for all to see. Moreover, he was doing the one-man, one-hand show. Now, I'd never seen a sock puppet show like that one. Later, I went to the Elephant Walk on 18th and Castro for a Perrier, only to find that one ordered Calistoga. That was the done thing to do. I was told this by a really nice man who bought me one. He also asked me to come over to see his dungeon. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but the more we talked, the more I was sure he wasn't joking. "You're from out of town," he commented casually. "I can tell." "How?" I asked. I was wearing my electric blue painter's pants with the red Calvin Klein shirt, my double wrap belt from Neiman Marcus, and my Italian fisherman sandals. Looking back, I now think, duh, not a single item of black. "It's the suntan," he replied. "Really?" "Yeah, guys here don't have tans, it's the fog." At the time, I thought of all the wasted effort of tanning, but later I realized that it was because I wasn't wearing the clone look of the early 80s. T-shirt, Levi button-fly jeans, black combat boots, mustache, and bomber jacket. At least I didn't commit the unpardonable sin of wearing white jeans. Mark told me in no uncertain terms that owning, let alone wearing, white jeans branded one as horribly East Bay, suburban and definitely uncool to the rest of the world, Concord or Union City to those in the Bay Area, and they wouldn't be tolerated in polite society. Besides, he explained, white jeans make even the smallest ass look huge. That vacation was a blur, but I remember dancing at Dreamland and later smooching at a bus stop on Market Street and 2nd with a guy named Sandy I met through Mark. This was a really big transgression for little old me from OKC. Sandy showed me around the city a day or two, and one memory I have is of watching them take down the old City of Paris department store. I was astonished that someone could demolish a building like that. I also met Sandy's roommate, David Berlew. David was the guy Vic knew from the Navy and the person he and Mark connected with the first time they moved to San Francisco. David Berlew. I still think of him with a sigh. What a doll. I still have a photo of him, nude and sleeping, like an exhausted modern-day Pan. Elfin is the best adjective. David was slight of build, about my height, had dark hair, and brown eyes that twinkled. His nickname was Beer Can. It wasn't too long before we got together to misbehave. The day of the job interview arrived. I took the M train to Stonestown to meet Mark, who would introduce me to his boss, Bob. Bob was my age, but had done exceedingly well for himself, it seems, as he was named the director of stores. That fact itself should have been a clue about this organization. The firm itself was called Roos Brothers, formerly Roos Atkins. Roos Brothers started out in the late 19th century as a nice men's and women's clothing store, and through the years it had made a reputation as one of the better clothing stores in the Bay Area. In the 50s, they merged with the Atkins chain, hence Roos Atkins, but by the late 70s had fallen on hard times. A group of investors bought 10 of the Roos Atkins stores with the aim of turning them back into the Roos Brothers of old, a sort of regional Brooks Brothers. Part of this image renovation was presentation, and Mark was hired to help accomplish that. Bob asked him to get whatever and whomever he needed, so Mark said he needed me as his assistant. The interview was casual and short. Looking back, I'm embarrassed that I handed over my portfolio in an envelope. It was just a stack of pictures of my displays with a rubber band around them. Thankfully, the work spoke for itself. Bob said that he would make a decision in a few weeks. As it was, I sincerely had to consider working for Mark again. Since I had worked under him in OKC, I knew what I was in for. He wasn't a bad person, nor an unkind one, just someone who liked to take credit for the work of others. I knew what the situation would be. While I was toting the barges and lifting the bales, Mark would be schmoozing with the manager and drinking coffee. Now, don't get me wrong, he did work, but his efforts always felt, well, thin. Knowing this, I had to look at this as a means to an end. This opportunity could get me out of OKC. However galling it would be to give up being the one in charge like I was at Dillard's, it would be advantageous on a number of fronts. Besides, it wouldn't be forever. Mark had this pattern of moving unexpectedly. The flip side to this situation was that Mark was really ill. He had been seriously ill from May until just a week or so before I arrived there, and was still weak. With neuropathy in his legs and feet as a result of the illness, he was having difficulty walking. He would be troubled with it for the rest of his life. So here Mark was, ill and desperately needing me to come on board. He knew I was a hard worker and had drive and a bit of talent. My hard work let him off the hook because physically he wasn't recovered and was barely keeping up appearances, not gaining any ground. I desperately wanted out of Oklahoma and was willing to trade some autonomy and swallow some pride to do it. At least in this situation, I wouldn't get the surprise, I'm your boss now, but was going into it with eyes open and by choice. As all good times do, this vacation ended. I went to the airport on a clear, sparkling, gorgeous, glittering jewel of a summer day in the Bay Area, all 68 degrees and sunshine. One of those Bay Area days where it doesn't get any better or more beautiful and makes one want to sing opera while speeding in a convertible with the top down. It was a glorious send-off, a memorable last look. When the plane touched down in Oklahoma City, it was 98 degrees with 98% humidity at 9:30 in the evening. The contrast was not lost on me. I can't do this anymore, I said to myself. I'm out of here. Back at work, I was inspired by all the display work I'd seen in San Francisco. I embarked on a store-wide campaign to make this Dillard store the best-looking one in the Oklahoma City area at least. The store looked pretty good already, but was nothing compared to what I'd seen on vacation. There were ulterior motives for this as well. First of all, I wanted to round out my portfolio with some more good work in preparation for either moving to San Francisco or Dallas or wherever I was going to end up. Second, I wanted to go out on top, so to speak. When I left, I wanted people to notice that I was gone. While I was in this prolific display mode, I would call California every day on my morning coffee break. When I got Bob on the line, I'd ask him if he'd made a decision yet. He would say no, he hadn't, and when he did, he'd let me know. I'd thank him and call again the next day. This went on for 2 weeks. It was a tactic that worked when I wanted to get into Dillard's, so I thought it might work again. Now, this was when long-distance charges were still an extra charge, so in case any of you are wondering who was paying for all of those long-distance charges from Oklahoma City to San Francisco, let me tell you about Anna and Louise, the 2 hard-of-hearing telephone operators from the Shepherd Mall store in Oklahoma City. To most of the folks at Dillard's, I was known as Tim Kane. When I was being paged, they'd announce over the loudspeaker, Tim Kane, call the operator please, Tim Kane. When I worked in the lamp department before I transferred to display, I'd call the operator for a customer carryout. One day, I decided to go down on my break and introduce myself to the switchboard ladies to meet them in person. Finding them was a challenge in the old building, and nobody quite knew where they were. Most likely, no one had ever been there. I found the room in the bowels of the building next to the boilers. The 2 operators, Anna and Louise, had worked in the basement PBX room so long that they sounded alike. One only knew who it was on the line by asking, which I always did. There they sat at this big old switchboard, which was bristling with plugs and wires, 2 little old ladies with big antique headsets on their heads. They looked like they had accidentally embraced punk. Instead of gray hair, one had apricot and the other had light blue. Years of fluorescent lights had bleached their skins to a blue-white that any goth kid would envy. This made their makeup resemble kabuki because they were both so very nearsighted they couldn't get a good look at themselves in the morning. When they saw an actual person in their doorway, Anna and Louise were at first surprised and a little confused, assuming some sort of emergency. I explained after introducing myself that I just wanted to thank them for their help and to meet the people behind the voices. Introductions and names were exchanged. "Well, Tim, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for coming to see us," Anna drawled. She was the one with the apricot-colored hair. "It's Ken King." "Oh, of course, Tim Kane. A very nice name," chimed Louise of the blue hair. Hard of hearing telephone operators. So from then on, I became Tim Kane, and I even had it put on my badge. So now, much later, we were friends, and Anna and Louise still liked me. They also still worked at Shepherd Mall. So I would just ring them up at the Shepherd Mall store, ask nicely, and they would put the calls through, which saved me all of those long-distance charges. And they were so nice about it, too. On the 15th call to Bob, he shouted, "All right, I give, you're hired." "When do you want me there?" I asked. "Call me tomorrow. I'm sure you've gotten into the habit already, so it won't be a problem." "Okay," I said. With that, I went down to Mr. Probst's office. Happily, he was in. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" I asked. "Sure, sit down. What's up?" "I've been offered a job in California, working as Mark's assistant." "You sure you want to do that?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm sure." Mr. Probst looked at me, seeming to size me up. "You know, I'll give you a $5,000 more a year to stay." Now, this was in 1981 Oklahoma dollars, a 40% increase in pay. I let a beat skip. "You've been holding out on me," I said. "If you can make that offer right now, it's been available all this time." He skipped a beat. "You're a smart one. Are you really going?" "Yeah. Your offer just confirmed it." "Okay," he sighed and looked at me. "Now that I know I've lost you, here's some advice. Ask them to pay for your move." "You can do that?" I asked. "You can ask for anything you want. They'll either say yes or no. But more importantly, Ken, get out of retail as soon as you can." "Why do you say that?" I asked, slightly taken aback. Ray, I right then started calling him Ray, explained the retail treadmill of inventory and spring and summer vacation and inventory and back to school and Christmas and inventory again in an endless cycle that traps people. "You've got something," Ray said. "I'd hate to see it snuffed out by the retail trap. Get out, use it to get where you need to go, and then get out." I've been lucky in life. When I need a sign, I usually get it. This time was no different. After telling Ray about the job offer, I started to get second thoughts. What if I couldn't succeed? How am I going to live in San Francisco with the cost of living there? Is this the right move for me? Am I biting off more than I can chew? I asked these questions for the rest of the day, making myself crazy until I could call Bob the next morning. When I spoke to him the next morning, he told me he needed me there in 10 days. "Will you pay for my move?" I asked. There was a heavy sigh. "Yeah, geez, just get here, okay?" "See you in 10 days, I said. In the next episode, Ken makes his big move to San Francisco. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.